You might sit back and pat yourself on the shoulders just a bit. We've accomplished some pretty amazing things here in this learning path for the 70-411 exam. We've deployed servers, both manually and automatically with Windows deployment services. We've configured some network services and some real advanced network services at that. We've gone through the deployment of our remote access server and even gone as far as configured direct access to get users that always-on VPN experience. We've configured Active Directory. We've done some stuff with file services. We've done some really cool things with group policy. But out of all of these that we've accomplished thus far, there's perhaps one thing that maybe we didn't implement it in the best way. Maybe there's a better way that we can get users connected into all this infrastructure we've built. Back a number of courses ago, when we configured that remote access server, we put together a really cool implementation that allowed users to connect into infrastructure through a VPN connection. We turned on direct access so that they wouldn't even need to connect up through that VPN infrastructure. We played a bit with the web application proxy so that users could connect to specific web pages as well. But in doing all of those configurations back a number of courses ago, one of the things that should have itched you in the back of your mind was exactly how that configuration worked. When we built that remote access server, we created a machine that was domain joined, that was in our Active Directory domain, but also at the edge of our network, the periphery, out in that DMZ, which worked perfectly because it allowed users to connect in. I mean, we have clients that are connecting in through direct access and through VPN, but was perhaps not the best implementation from a security perspective. And so it is for that reason, all the way here at the end, the very last course here in this learning path for the 70-411, that we're going to revisit one of those earlier topics on configuring network services. Here in this course, we'll talk about how to reconfigure all the network services that we discussed back early on in this learning path. And this time, we'll do so in a way that will make your security people much more excited about the implementation you're putting together. Here in this course, we'll talk about how you can implement radius services, or a radius server, so that the machine that sits out on the edge, the machine that's in that DMZ, need no longer be one that's attached to your Active Directory domain. Rather, that machine in a workgroup can instead forward on the authentication requests to a much more protected machine on the inside, your radius server, so that you can eliminate the need to extend your Active Directory out onto that machine which is directly attached to the internet. Doing so eliminates one of the biggest risks in the environment we've constructed so far, and that's just simply having to have Active Directory extending out into that DMZ. Out in the production world, when you're doing this for real, that's probably not going to be the best configuration. And so it's this extra little bit of effort in setting up these radius services that will make that environment one that you'll feel comfortable in implementing. Now, also in this course, we'll talk additionally about a NAP infrastructure, Network Access Protection Services, that you could layer over the top of that existing radius implementation. NAP is a solution that allows you to ensure any incoming clients have certain prerequisite conditions or configurations before you allow them into the internal environment. With a NAP implementation in place, you could make sure that those clients have antivirus installed, all the latest patches, all the latest network configurations to protect your internal environment from a misconfigured and perhaps virus-containing machine. Now, curiously, NAP is a solution that's been deprecated out of Microsoft Windows and Windows Server 2012 R2, so all odds are good that you won't find yourself implementing this solution in any real production sense. But Microsoft still includes the requirements and the objectives here in the 70-411. So we'll touch very lightly on how you could implement a NAP solution if you were to. Again, odds are you probably won't because it will no longer be available in the next version of Microsoft Windows. But for your purposes for the 411, we'll talk a bit about just the things that are necessary so that at least you can answer those questions correctly when it comes time to sit the exam. Now, if you're just joining us, my discussion here on those courses in the past can lead you to believe that we're actually pretty far in our learning path here for the 70-411. And in fact, we are. This learning path began early with a look at the MCSA and the 70-411's fit within that greater MCSA and MCSE curriculum. This is the R2 version of all this content that completely replaces all the previous generation content that you may have seen in the Pluralsight catalog, now retired. From there, we took a look at deploying, managing, and maintaining services, both manually as well as using those automated tools. We configured our remote access server and DNS services to get clients connected to each other as well as to the inside world. We did some work configuring and managing Active Directory, as well as taking a look at file and, to a much lesser extent, print services. We did an extensive look, an exhaustive look at group policy and group policy preferences, and that takes us here to our final course in this learning path that talks about configuring a network policy server, or NPS infrastructure. Here in this course, we have 3 different topics we need to discuss, the very first of which being to configure the network policy server itself. And in fact, here for our network configuration, we're going to take the existing remote access server that we built back on that last course on configuring network services, and we're going to flush the entire configuration that we built into it. Everything we talk about here has to do with the VPN connection. We'll not talk any at all about the direct access configuration we used before, because with that VPN connection, we'll configure up another server, an NPS server, that will sit inside our Active Directory domain to handle the authentication and requests that come in from our now reconditioned remote access server that will now move into a workgroup that sits out in our DMZ. From there, we'll configure some NPS policies, so essentially defining the experience, the rules that are required for users to be able to come into this internal environment. And then lastly, conclude with that very quick look at network access protection. Again, completely deprecated in Windows Server 2012 R2, and so our only purpose here is for completeness for the topics you need to know for the 70-411. So this is our final course here on the network policy server and all the different things you can do with NPS. Coming up next, we'll begin this process by taking a look at our NPS server, our network policy server, and the different radius configurations that we need to lay into place. With this infrastructure, we'll be building that NPS server as a radius server and pointing it to our remote access server in the DMZ that will become a radius client. We'll then configure some NPS templates, essentially the templates that define how the client and the server interact. We'll talk a bit about radius accounting, which is a mechanism to just simply log all the different activities going on a radius server. And we'll talk very quickly about certificates and how you can use certificate authentication as a way to ensure that the right users and the right machines make their way into your internal network. All of that and more is the topic for our next module coming up.